class, we're delighted to introduce Adam LaSpata, who is a doctoral candidate, and he will be presenting a session discussing program notes. We're thrilled to have him with us. He has been writing the program notes for the university concerts for several years, and he is well on his way into completing his PhD, and we're very excited to have him with us. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Thunderous applause. There we go. Cool. Well, yeah, I'm going to talk to you about program notes, and talking about not only how to write program notes, but why bother. And I'm going to present my thoughts on writing program notes, having done so not only here at UNT for the orchestra concerts, but also in my 6 years as conductor of the Arlington Heights Community Concert Band in Arlington Heights, Illinois. So that experience doing program notes for that group was different doing program notes at UNT, and I'll explain why. And the 5 things we want to think about when writing program notes are author. In this case, that will be you. Your audience, your venue, your style, and your purpose. Now, the first 4 of these categories are how to write program notes. But the purpose, as you could imagine, is the why. Why even bother? Besides the fact that it's part of your graduate assistantship. Author. Who is writing? What role are you taking on in writing these program notes? Are you writing program notes for your own recital? So you're approaching this from the perspective of a performer. You know how the piece goes. You know what are the most interesting parts of the piece. Do you want to tell your audience about a particular compositional technique, or listen to this harmonic progression here that you should look out for because it's just very exciting. You might be the director, as I was of my community band up in Illinois. Now there, I have a different perspective of music. I've got the scores in front of me. I know everything that's going on. So I might want to tell the audience not only what to listen for in the music, but also a little bit of historical context, because after all, I am a music historian. You might be a composer. At Northern Illinois University, where I got my first master's degree, I did a composition recital. So presenting works from that perspective is different from being a performer. You've got a deeper attachment to that music because you created it yourself. So you might want to tell your audience members what went into your compositional process, how the theme came into your mind one day when you were singing in the shower and you thought that would make an excellent sonata. Or you might be, as I was here at UNT, an outside writer who is sort of contracted to fulfill part of your job, writing the program notes. Now, as I said, I wrote program notes for the symphony and concert orchestras without being a member of those groups. Now, I've played in orchestras, I've conducted orchestras, I've composed for orchestras, but not being a part of those groups here gives me the opportunity to sort of have a blank slate. I can tell the audience whatever I think is interesting. Oh, we've got this Haydn symphony, but there's a D-flat major chord in it. Listen for that, because that's not something you would normally hear in a symphony in C major in the classical era. And you might tell them some general historical things, but writing as an outside writer gives you an opportunity to be sort of a jack of all trades master of none. Your audience is for whom you're writing. And this is very important and actually ties back into writing program notes here at UNT. How old is your audience? Writing program notes for children, say if you're performing with your woodwind quintet at a children's concert and you're playing excerpts from Peter and the Wolf, is going to be very different than presenting that same music for adults. You might use different vocabulary. You might want to make your words a little shorter for the kids. What is the experience of your audience? Are they musical aficionados? They're coming because, well, they have listened to music for years and they want to hear the best players in Texas, so of course they come to UNT. They might be knowledgeable amateurs. They might have played in orchestras, sung in choirs, gigged around on saxophone when they were younger, or they might still be doing it. So they might bring a depth of knowledge that you don't even know about. So you can put things in that they'll get, extra, maybe not inside jokes, but a little bit more complex information that they will understand. For example, pointing out a D-flat major chord in a Haydn symphony in C. If they're knowledgeable about classical music, they might understand why that's so weird and why you're pointing it out. Or they might be fellow professionals. Of course, when you're writing program notes, you're going to have the top tier people. You're going to have your instructors. You're going to have your professors of theory, of history, come to these concerts and hear you perform. Or when you're out there in the world, you might have another violinist watching you perform the Mendelssohn Concerto. So what do you want to say to people who are really at the highest level, who know exactly what you're doing and what goes into your piece? That's nerve-wracking. So consider how old and how good they are. Because a recital is, of course, very important to your career. But it's not a huge ensemble concert. So you might want to consider that differently. Are you performing at a religious institution? Even if you say you're performing at a church, people are going to that venue, they're seeing stained glass windows, they might be seeing the pipes for the pipe organ, they might think, oh, this is going to be some wonderful religious music, and then you do John Cage. I'm not saying John Cage is not wonderfully transcendent music, but if you, oftentimes when you perform at a religious institution, you might be performing music that befits that particular denomination or faith. So you can incorporate that into your program notes as well, because a lot of times, say an audience member comes to a church to hear you perform, they might be a member of that church, and they might be coming there for some spiritual edification, as well as hearing your wonderful music. Style. This is the big part of how you're writing. When I was conductor of the Arlington Heights Community Concert Band, the way we would do program notes is I would write them out for most of the pieces, and then one of my band members would read the program notes. Now, I would have to write out the phonetic pronunciation for the words. I'm not going to give them IPA for those.
What is IPA?
The International Phonetic Alphabet.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. It's also beer. So they would read these program notes, and I would have to say, this is how you pronounce the composers' names. You don't have to say Bach, but Bach is okay. But then, for the final piece in the concert, instead of having the program note reader verbally read the program notes, I would turn to the audience and give the notes for the last concert. Sort of breaking the fourth wall, if you will. Delivering the notes for the final piece, thanking the audience for coming, wishing them well in this holiday season, because the community band always does a holiday concert. Have a safe drive home, watch out, those roads are icy, because it's Illinois. Or you can do written program notes, and there your tone might be more formal. In 1872, blah, 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 blah. And you can still have fun with those. And I'm not saying you can't be formal with verbal program notes. But again, this ties back to who your audience is, what your venue is, what role you are playing in these program notes. And then your tone can be either casual or technical. Do you want to point out the florid melodic lines, or oh look, invertible counterpoint? That's very interesting. Now, invertible counterpoint is when you take one melody here and switch them around. That's technical writing. Or you can be casual. You can be a little silly in your program notes, but make sure that your tone fits the venue, the audience, your everything that you're writing for. Because if not, then there's going to be this cognitive dissonance, and people will think, well, he's dressed up in this tuxedo and doing this ages-old classical music, but then he's being silly and performing and doing these program notes almost as if the notes themselves are a performance. And you want your performance to have a nice arc. You want to have consistency. So if you're giving verbal program notes and you yourself are the performer, the director, the composer who might be conducting their works, you want to make sure that everything in your performance has the same attitude. And finally, you have vocabulary. What are the words you use? I'll go back to my example of a woodwind quintet playing an arrangement of Peter and the Wolf for a children's concert. And this happens a lot. It would be fun for maybe the oboist to lean over to the students and play a little, what's the oboe, the duck? I think so. The clarinet is the bird? I don't remember. I need to learn about Peter and the Wolf a little more. So you can use fun, sort of flowery language, what they call purple prose. Language that's sort of over the top, uses a lot of adjectives, and really gets into describing the music. Or you can be more concise and direct in what you want to communicate. This is what the music is doing. These are the things to listen for. Here's some historical context for it. And that's fine too. I like to do a blend of both of these. Now, in scholarly academic writing, flowery purple prose is frowned upon. Conciseness, directness is favored. But in program notes, you can get away with a blend of the two. Especially when you are talking about Mahler's symphony and you sneak the phrase more cowbell into there. I did that. It was fun.
You did that?
I did. The editor changed the phrase to more cowbell sounds because I'm pretty sure she did not get the reference. What are you gonna do? But that brings up a good point. You might have an editor reading your program notes and saying, I really don't understand what you're saying here. Can you clarify this? Or you might want to put this section that you have at the front of your program notes at the end. So bear in mind that even though program notes are your creative work, you might still have someone saying, you need to tweak thus and such a little. And then the purpose. Why even bother? What's the point in program notes? What are the things that you want to point out to your audience members? If you're writing about composers, do you need them to know that Bach was an 18th century composer? Do you want them to know he was a Baroque composer? Do you want to know that at the exact moment Bach died, the Baroque era was over? Which is not all true. But think about what you want your audience to know about these composers. That you could talk to them about the composer's relationship to their contemporaries. For example, Bach copied and reworked a lot of Vivaldi's sonatas and concerti. Bach was also contemporary of Handel and Telemann. Do you want to talk to them about how Bach manipulates a theme in a fugue? And how, oh my gosh, what is going on in the pedals of this organ fugue? That's amazing. What are some interesting things about the compositions? Now again, who you are will affect how you talk about the compositions and the interesting features. As a performer, you might point out a particular passage because it was really difficult for you to practice and learn, and your teacher grilled you on it. So it's stuck in your mind, so you want to mention that to the audience. Or you might want to tell them about a particular passage in a piece you composed because you want your audience to remember that, because you're going to manipulate it somehow later on in the piece. And this pass is very important. Relationship to other pieces on the program. As a conductor, I would develop themed concerts because I found that audience members like to come to a concert and know that there was some overarching, unifying idea that kept the concert together. So what is the relationship of Tchaikovsky's March Slav to, let's say, Alfred Reed's Armenian dances? Why put Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture on a concert of American music, especially on the 4th of July? These are things that people would like to know about. Because even though we take for granted that, oh yeah, 1812 Overture, it's got cannons, it's American music. Oh yeah, it's for the War of 1812. No, it's not. And then, if there are particular performers on your concert, are you the conductor and you're playing doing a concerto? Who is the soloist for this concerto? Who did they study with? Have they released any recordings? And the soloist might especially want you to say these things because not only are they performing a solo concerto with you, if you mention, oh, they performed here and they have these recordings, that makes them look good, and people might say, oh, they were such a wonderful performer, I want to go out and buy their CD. If you're a performer as well, you might say, and I've released these recordings, or I've got CDs for sale in the lobby, say that, but also make sure you perform well so people want to go and buy your music. Here are some resources that you can use, not just here at UNT, but in the wider world when you have been released and are professional musicians. Oxford Music Online is the online version of the Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians. Now, there is nothing stopping you for the rest of your lives from coming up to the 4th floor of Willis Library and looking through these actual book versions of the Grove Dictionary. And you'll find information on composers, on musical styles, on musical pieces. But we live in an online world now, and access to Oxford Music Online will give all of those at the click of a mouse button. If you are performing certain genres all the time, you might want to refer to large-scale volumes, multi-volume works that cover a particular topic. For example, the symphony and concert orchestras, surprise, surprise, perform symphonies a lot. So a lot of my program notes were taken from A. Peter Brown's Symphonic Repertoire, which is a multi-volume work that covers the history of the symphony from the pre-classical era all the way to the 20th century. Now, in my opinion, it doesn't do enough for the 20th century, but that history is still kind of being written. And Brown will use all sorts of technical terms. But what I did was I took his terminology and I sort of adapted it. I watered it down just a little to make it more palatable and accessible to the people who would read my program notes here. I've done a lot of work with Oratorio in scholarly writing, so I've used Smithers' A History of the Oratorio. Cambridge University has published a wonderful series of companions or histories or guides, and they're all sort of the same thing. The Cambridge Companion to American Music, the Cambridge Guide to Music Theory, and they have guides and companions for pretty much anything you can think of that is in the mainstream of Western art music. And there's even a Cambridge Companion to Musical Theater, so that's a lot of fun. And don't be afraid to look at CD and LP liner notes, because remember, you can only fit so much in that little jacket. So oftentimes you look in there and you will see exactly what the program note writer wants you to know about that piece, because they only have so much space. And finally, I will mention A Short Guide to Writing About Music by Jonathan Bellman, which is a wonderful resource for, writing about music. And since program notes are, in fact, writing about music, you can find this at your local library, like the one here, or on Amazon. But if you don't have access to someone who can tell you how to write program notes or give you suggestions, this is a wonderful resource to go to. So,
Thank you.
you're very welcome. Does anyone have any questions?
First, thank you.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Questions? Several.
What did you mean by the CD and LP liners? Is that like from the LPs from the back of the LPs?
Yep,
or
from the LP.
Okay.
Yep.
And the CD, what do you mean by the CD liner? Is it inside when you open the
Yep, the little booklet, when you open it up, it's the little booklet
Okay.
that you pull out.
Okay.
If you are speaking from the stage doing verbal notes, but you also are required to have written notes, how do you go about doing a good balance of that?
That's an excellent question. It's pretty boring to just read your verbal notes. So you can put in your verbal notes aspects of the music that might be more casual, because giving the verbal notes gives you an opportunity to engage directly with the audience. And there, you could put in things like, thank you for coming to this performance. I am who's he, what's it. I'll be performing blah, 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 blah. This piece was composed when blah, 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 blah was in a relationship with Freddie Doody. And see if you can hear some of that tension in this song. And then you perform. At the end, you can say, thank you for coming to this performance. There is a reception in the lobby because you always want to give them little snacks after your performance. Promise them food beforehand and they'll come. But I would suggest writing them in two different ways. Maybe have the written notes more formal. That's where you can include more of, let's say, the music theory, the music history. And then the verbal ones can be a more personal connection and interaction with your audience members. Yeah.
So if you're like borrowing ideas and information from like a CD liner or some other resource, is it not like plagiarizing to like use that in your notes without crediting them?
Yes. So, credit them. As Adam LaSpata says in the liner notes to Haydn Symphony No. 88, ... Always, in any sort of writing or any sort of delivery of information, whether it's verbal or written, make sure you're crediting your source, because as you said, otherwise it is plagiarism.
But I haven't really like seen that in most program notes. I mean, it's like people act as if most things are just like general information.
A lot of it is, but especially if you're giving a specific quote. Now, I love symphonies, and I know a lot about symphonies, but that doesn't mean I know a lot about every single symphony. So that's why I mentioned that in his writings on Symphony No. 88 by Haydn, A. Peter Brown notes that ...
Okay.
Any other questions? So what do you think about, in the verbal commentary, talking not just about the music and the intricacies of looking into different, aspects of the works, but also talking about perhaps as the performers, what connection they have with the works they chose and why they even chose that music, what spoke to them about that. What are your thoughts on that, and has any of that also been put into the program notes in writing, or would you recommend keeping things a little bit more separate, or just, because I know I've seen that in many instances more on the verbal part, but what would you say about, deciding where to put those types of more personal, aspects that highlight why they chose those pieces in the first place?
And this connects with what you were saying. I think that personal aspect becomes even more personal and more meaningful if you do it verbally. I would avoid saying things like, I chose to do Mozart Concerto No. 2 on my recital because my teacher assigned it to me. They may very well have. Don't tell your audience that, because then they'll think, oh, so this performer has no real connection to this piece. Now, okay, in connection with Mozart's Horn Concerto, you might want to say, now, Mozart was good friends with the hornist for whom he wrote these concerti, and because Mozart liked to pick on people, he used 4 different color inks in writing these concerti, and wrote little insults to his friend in the margins. Like he called him a cheesemonger, which I guess is not really an insult, but it can be distracting when you're trying to play this music. That's the sort of thing you can say verbally.
Right.
And if you do it in writing, you won't have you can't put in a little wink or call him a cheesemonger. Silly things like that. They help humanize you and show that yes, you are a real person, not just a machine making music.
Thank you. That's a great answer.
Kind of off the topic of verbal notes, if you're on a strict time limit, because at UNT you have to be in and out.
Oh yeah.
If you are speaking and you're also performing, doing your pieces, would you say just to have like a tidbit for each, or like by set, just kind of like If you're doing in sets, I guess.
Yeah, and sets are a really good way of, again, connecting your recital together, connecting your concert together. Now, you might say, my next set will be a series of Czech art songs. You might mention that Czech is a difficult language to learn. I don't know any Czech, but I know that there's a lot of great vocal music in Czech. So you might want to say something like that that'll tie all your pieces together. Then of course, if you're giving the translations, you might direct your audience to read the translations printed in the program.
I have one more question.
Okay.
Do you think in a concert, the performer, is there such thing as saying, or is there such thing as talking too much?
Oh, absolutely. In rehearsals and performances, you can talk too much, and that gets back to what you were saying. My suggestion is plan ahead what you're going to say, especially if it's the first time you're giving verbal program notes, and time yourself. Speak more slowly and more articulately than you would normally do so in conversation. Always time out your pieces. You know how long each piece is that you're performing. You know how long that you have for your whole performance. Getting on and off stage, bowing, accepting the flowers that are thrown at you from the audience. Things like that always happen. The adoring fans coming up to you. Oh, your notes are so beautiful. But time out your verbal program notes. Know what you want to say. As you get more comfortable performing in front of an audience and giving these verbal program notes, then you can start to go off script. But even at the end of my band concerts, when I would give the program notes to the audience, I would keep it short and sweet because they want to hear the last piece. And let's face it, in a holiday concert with a community band, it's always Leroy Anderson's Christmas Festival. It just is. Or Sleigh Ride.
And drink water, I recommend that.
Oh my gosh, yes.
For me, it was very interesting, the ability for, your throat dries out when you're nervous and you're performing, and to have to combine that with speaking, which is what is not generally the norm, right, at least when you get through the traditional training. We forget that our throat's going to get dry, so then we have a dry throat from being nervous, and then we have to talk on top of that, so always have some water. That's a little side note, backstage.
Even if you're not a singer.
Regardless of
Yeah.
whether you're a singer or not, because you will get a little bit nervous, or a lot, depending on how, and speaking is something that requires, so for singers, I guess they're more used to that, because they have to manage, that's their instrument, they have more preparation, but for an instrumentalists, when we're not used to speaking from stage, when you start doing it, have some water. Thank you very much.
You're
I
very
really
welcome.
appreciate it. This was fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.